On a chilly morning, as the fog blanketed the quiet countryside, a lone figure sat by the roadside. It was a dog, thin, with matted fur and weary eyes that seemed far older than his years. He wasn't just any stray. This dog had a story, a life before this desolation, and a heartbreaking reason why he waited so patiently in the same spot day after day. The villagers nearby had grown used to his presence, but no one knew the full extent of his tale. They called him Lucky, though his circumstances seemed anything but fortunate. Lucky had been left behind 4 years ago. Family once loved him, or so it seemed. They played with him, fed him scraps under the dinner table, and promised him a life of comfort. But promises don't always last. One day, the family packed their belongings into a truck and drove off, leaving Lucky behind. He chased them as far as his legs would carry him, barking desperately, but they never stopped. Since then, he had returned to this same patch of road, where he had last seen their car disappear into the distance. It was here that he waited through rain, snow, and scorching sun, holding on to hope. As the seasons changed, Lucky became a fixture of the area. Children whispered stories about him at school, and passers-by occasionally dropped scraps of food. But not everyone was kind. Some mocked his loyalty, calling it foolish. Others tried to shoo him away, thinking he was a nuisance. Yet Lucky stayed, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if he believed any day now, his family would return. One winter, the harshest in years, the cold seemed unbearable. Lucky's shivering body was a painful reminder to the townspeople of how much he had endured. A few kind souls banded together to build him a small shelter from scrap wood and blankets. It wasn't much, but it shielded him from the biting winds. They left bowls of food and water, yet no matter how much they cared for him, Lucky never left his post. The years wore on, and the story of Lucky spread beyond the village. Photos of the loyal dog began circulating online, touching hearts far and wide. Comments poured in from strangers who were moved by his devotion. Some even offered to adopt him, but the townspeople knew he wouldn't leave his spot. Lucky wasn't waiting for a new home. He was waiting for the one he'd lost. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the fields, something unexpected happened. A car, one that hadn't been seen in years, turned down the road where Lucky waited. The engine hummed as it drew closer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lucky stood up and wagged his tail with cautious excitement. Could it be his family? The villagers, who had gathered nearby, watched in stunned silence as the car came to a halt. The door opened and a figure stepped out. Lucky's heart raced as he inched closer, his tail wagging faster. His eyes filled with a mix of hope and disbelief. The person knelt down, calling his name softly. What happened next would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Lucky's paws froze in place as the person's voice reached his ears. It was soft, almost hesitant, but there was something familiar about it. His tail wagged uncontrollably now, though he didn't dare move closer. The figure called his name again, this time more firmly, and Lucky's ears perked up. Could this really be happening? After all the years of waiting, after enduring the rain, snow, and loneliness, had the moment finally come? The crowd that had gathered whispered amongst themselves. Some wiped away tears, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Could this be one of Lucky's long-lost family members? The stranger certainly looked overwhelmed. They crouched on the gravel road, reaching out a trembling hand, as if unsure whether Lucky would come to them. The dog took a hesitant step forward, his movements careful and unsure. His eyes darted back and forth, trying to read the face in front of him. But just as Lucky closed the distance between them, he suddenly stopped. Something about the scent in the air made him hesitate. His tail slowed and his head tilted to one side. The person before him seemed familiar, yet not entirely. It wasn't the face he had been picturing all these years. The crowd fell silent, holding their breath as the stranger finally spoke again. "I'm sorry," they said, their voice cracking. "I didn't know you were still here." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unspoken for far too long. Lucky stepped back, his tail dropping slightly, as though he understood something wasn't quite right. The person sat down fully now, tears streaming down their face. "We thought you'd. I didn't think you'd wait this long," they added, their voice filled with guilt. It was clear this wasn't the reunion everyone had hoped for. The stranger wasn't the entire family, just one person from a life Lucky had left behind. Their expression was a mix of relief, regret, and sadness. The villagers exchanged glances, unsure whether to step in or give them space. The stranger began to talk, their voice trembling with emotion. They explained how, all those years ago, life had taken an unexpected turn. The family had faced financial struggles and were forced to move quickly. Leaving Lucky behind had never been the plan, but in the chaos of packing and relocating, he'd been left behind accidentally. When they realized what had happened, they couldn't return. They'd moved too far away. And as time passed, they convinced themselves that Lucky would have found a new home, that someone kind would have taken him in. "I looked for you," they whispered, their words barely audible. "When I saw your picture online, I couldn't believe it. You stayed here all this time, waiting for us." Lucky watched them carefully, his body language cautious but not unfriendly. He didn't wag his tail, but he didn't retreat either. It was as if he was processing everything, trying to understand the flood of emotions this person was bringing with them. The villagers began to piece together the story as the stranger continued. They had driven hours to get here after stumbling across the viral posts about the loyal dog who never left his spot. Their guilt had grown unbearable, knowing he had waited for them for 4 long years. But the question on everyone's mind remained unanswered. Would Lucky forgive them? The stranger reached into their pocket and pulled out something small and worn, a collar with Lucky's name etched onto the tag. They held it out with shaky hands, hoping it might spark some recognition. Lucky sniffed the air, inching forward slowly, his nose brushing against the familiar item. The moment was electric, but it didn't come with the joyful reunion anyone had expected. Instead, Lucky sat down a few feet away, his eyes staring into the distance, as though he was waiting for someone else. It became clear to the stranger, and everyone watching, that while Lucky remembered, his heart still longed for the family he had once known. The guilt on the stranger's face deepened, and they began to cry openly, whispering apologies Lucky couldn't understand but perhaps could feel. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the scene. Lucky turned his head toward the horizon, his gaze fixed on the road he had watched every day for years. The stranger wiped their tears, standing up slowly as the crowd murmured softly. A villager stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the stranger's shoulder. "Maybe," they said softly, "it's not too late to make things right." But what did making things right mean for a dog whose heart still belonged to the past? The stranger lingered for a moment longer, their hand gripping the old collar as if it might somehow bridge the gap between them and the dog they had once known. But Lucky stayed where he was, his posture calm yet distant. The villagers exchanged hushed murmurs, unsure what to make of the scene. Some felt anger toward the stranger for leaving Lucky behind, while others couldn't help but pity them. After all, how many people could face the living embodiment of their guilt? As night began to fall, the stranger knelt again, this time lowering the collar onto the ground. "I know I can't change the past," they said softly, their voice trembling. "But I'll come back tomorrow, if you'll let me." They stood, their shoulders heavy with regret, and slowly walked to their car. Lucky didn't follow. He simply watched as the vehicle disappeared down the road, the same way he had done countless times before. The crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads, others wiping their eyes. A young boy who had often brought Lucky scraps of food tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why didn't he go with them?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. His mother hesitated, looking toward Lucky before replying. Sometimes, even when someone says they're sorry, it takes time to trust them again. That night, Lucky stayed by his usual spot, curled up under the small shelter the villagers had built for him. The stars were bright, but the air carried a chill that seeped through his thin fur. A local shopkeeper named Emma, who had been one of Lucky's most consistent caretakers, stopped by to leave him a fresh bowl of water and a blanket. She crouched beside him, stroking his fur gently. "You're not just waiting for them, are you?" she whispered. "You're waiting for the life you had." Lucky rested his head on his paws, his eyes half closed but still watching the road. The next day, the stranger returned, true to their word. They parked their car a little farther back this time, perhaps realizing that rushing toward Lucky might overwhelm him. They brought a small bag filled with food, treats, and toys, setting them carefully near his shelter. Lucky eyed them cautiously but didn't move. The stranger sat down on the grass nearby, a respectful distance away, and began to speak again. Their words were soft, almost as if they were talking more to themselves than to Lucky. "I wanted to come back sooner," they admitted, their gaze fixed on the horizon. "But I thought you'd forgotten about us. That it was better to leave you to whatever life you'd built here. I see now that I was wrong. You never gave up on us, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm here because I want to try." Lucky didn't react, though his ears twitched slightly at the sound of their voice. It was clear that while he recognized them, something inside him still held back. The villagers watched from a distance, some with folded arms, others with cautious hope. They debated amongst themselves whether the stranger's intentions were genuine, or if this was just another fleeting moment of guilt. As the days passed, the stranger began to visit regularly. They brought food and toys, but they never forced Lucky to interact. Instead, they sat nearby, sometimes reading aloud or simply watching the road with him. Slowly, Lucky's stance began to soften. He started eating the food they brought, though he still kept a wary distance. The villagers noticed the subtle shift, and some even began to warm to the stranger. But not everyone was convinced. A man named Greg, who had always been vocal about his disdain for Lucky's previous family, approached the stranger one afternoon. "You think showing up now will erase what you did?" he asked bluntly, his tone sharp. The stranger didn't argue. They simply nodded and replied, "I don't expect to erase anything. I just want to be here for him now." Greg scoffed but said nothing more. He walked away, muttering under his breath about how some wounds never heal. Emma, however, decided to give the stranger a chance. She offered them advice on how to gain Lucky's trust and shared stories about the dog's resilience over the years. "He's stronger than most people I know," she said. "But that strength comes from a lot of pain." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road, something unusual happened. Lucky, who had always kept his distance, took a few hesitant steps toward the stranger. The air seemed to still as everyone watched, holding their breath. The stranger froze, not wanting to scare him off. Lucky sniffed the air around them, his eyes searching their face as if trying to decide whether to let them in. But just as the moment seemed to shift, a distant noise interrupted the quiet, a car engine rumbling faintly down the road. Lucky's ears perked up and he turned abruptly, his focus snapping back to the horizon. The stranger's face fell, realizing that no matter how far they'd come, Lucky was still waiting for someone else. The hum of the approaching car sent a ripple of anticipation through the small crowd that had gathered near the edge of the road. Lucky's posture changed instantly. His body stiffened and his eyes locked on the horizon, a single thread of hope pulling him forward. For a moment, everything else faded. The villagers, the stranger, even the setting sun casting its fiery glow over the fields. Lucky's world narrowed to the sound of that engine, growing louder with every passing second. The stranger stood motionless, their heart pounding as they watched Lucky take a few hesitant steps toward the sound. Could it be them? They whispered under their breath, though they didn't dare voice the thought too loudly. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether this was the moment Lucky had been waiting for or just another car passing through. As the vehicle came into view, it was clear this wasn't a local car. Its sleek black exterior gleamed under the fading sunlight, and its unfamiliar presence stirred murmurs among the onlookers. The driver slowed down as they approached, likely noticing the small crowd and the lone dog standing in the middle of the road. The car came to a stop, and for a heartbeat, everything was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lucky stood frozen, his tail still, his eyes scanning the car with an intensity that spoke of years of longing. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was dressed neatly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern as she looked around. When her eyes landed on Lucky, she paused, her face softening. She crouched slightly, holding out her hand, but Lucky didn't move. His gaze darted past her, toward the back of the car, as though searching for someone else. The woman turned, gesturing to the passenger seat. Another door opened, and a man stepped out. He looked around nervously, his eyes lingering on the dog before him. "Is this the dog everyone's been talking about?" he asked, his voice uncertain. The villagers remained silent, their collective attention fixed on Lucky, who hadn't taken his eyes off the car. The stranger, standing a few steps behind, felt their chest tighten. They wanted to say something, but words wouldn't come. The man walked slowly toward Lucky, stopping a few feet away. He knelt down, his movements careful and deliberate. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his tone warm but unsure. "You've been waiting a long time, haven't you?" Lucky tilted his head slightly, his ears twitching at the sound of the man's voice. It wasn't the voice he'd been waiting for. His tail gave a small, hesitant wag, but his feet stayed planted. The woman joined the man, both now kneeling in front of Lucky. They looked at each other, their expressions heavy with emotion. "He's incredible," the woman said, her voice cracking. "Years. I can't even imagine." The stranger, still clutching Lucky's old collar, stepped forward. Their voice was quiet but firm. "He's been waiting for someone else," they said, their eyes on the dog. "I think he thought it was you." The couple looked at each other, a flicker of realization passing between them. "We read about him online," the man explained. "We don't know who he's waiting for, but we couldn't stay away after hearing his story. We wanted to help, maybe give him a home if he'd let us." The woman nodded, adding, "But it seems like his heart is still somewhere else." The villagers murmured softly, some nodding in agreement. Emma stepped forward, her voice kind but firm. "Lucky has spent years waiting here. It's not just a place to him, it's his whole world. I don't think he's ready to leave, no matter how kind you are." As if to confirm her words, Lucky took a few steps back, his eyes still focused on the horizon. The man and woman didn't try to follow him. Instead, they stood and stepped aside, giving him space. The stranger, their heart heavy, placed Lucky's collar gently on the ground near his shelter. "I'll keep coming back," they said quietly, more to themselves than anyone else. "Even if he doesn't choose me, I won't leave him again." The sky darkened as the sun disappeared completely, leaving only a faint glow on the horizon. Lucky remained still, his silhouette framed against the fading light. The villagers began to drift away, their hearts aching for the dog who seemed trapped between hope and heartbreak. The couple, the stranger, and Emma lingered a little longer, each silently wondering if the next car to appear would finally bring the resolution Lucky deserved. In the distance, another faint hum began to rise, breaking the stillness of the evening. It was faint, barely more than a whisper at first, but Lucky's ears perked up instantly. His body tensed, his tail gave a slight wag, and for the first time in years, he let out a soft, hopeful bark. Everyone turned their eyes toward the horizon, their breaths caught in their throats. Could this finally be the moment? The hum grew louder, steady and unwavering, as headlights pierced the growing darkness. Lucky's bark echoed again, sharper this time, filled with an energy that made everyone stand straighter. The couple, the stranger, and Emma exchanged glances, their hearts racing as they turned toward the road. Lucky moved forward, his steps cautious but determined. His eyes locked on the approaching car as if he already knew who was inside. The vehicle slowed, its engine purring softly as it rolled to a stop a short distance away. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was older, with lines etched into his face that spoke of years of hard living. His clothes were dusty, his boots scuffed, and he carried himself with a weariness that didn't match the excitement in Lucky's gaze. The dog's tail wagged furiously now, his whole body trembling with anticipation. The man froze when he saw Lucky, his hand resting on the car door as if steadying himself. "Lucky," he said, his voice rough but filled with something unspoken. The dog barked again, taking another step forward. His nose lifted as he caught the man's scent. It was as though a dam had broken, and the memories of years past flooded the air between them. But just as quickly as the moment seemed to shift toward reunion, something unexpected happened. The passenger door opened, and a second figure stepped out. This time it was a young woman, her face pale, her hands clutching something tightly to her chest. She looked at the man, then at Lucky, and hesitated. Lucky's excitement faltered for a moment, his tail slowing as he sniffed the air again, his gaze darting between the two figures. It was clear he recognized the man, but the woman was unfamiliar. Yet something about her presence seemed to stir a different kind of tension. The man finally broke the silence, his voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't think he'd still be here," he muttered, almost to himself. He took a step toward Lucky but stopped when the woman grabbed his arm. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "He's been through so much already. What if it's too late?" Lucky watched them both, his ears flicking back and forth as if trying to make sense of the interaction. The crowd, now silent and on edge, shifted uneasily. Emma took a cautious step forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone firm but not unkind. "Do you know Lucky?" The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the dog. "He was my dog," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "4 years ago, I had to leave him behind. It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't safe for him where I was going. But I thought someone would take him in." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. The woman at his side looked away, her grip tightening on whatever she was holding. Emma frowned, her gaze shifting between them. "If he was your dog," she asked, "why didn't you come back for him sooner?" The man hesitated, glancing at the woman before replying. "I didn't know he was still here," he admitted. "I left this town and never looked back. I didn't think he'd wait for me. I didn't think anyone would remember him." His voice cracked and he ran a hand through his hair. "But then I saw the posts online. I knew I had to come back. I just didn't expect." His words trailed off as the woman stepped forward, revealing what she had been holding. It was a small, tattered leash, frayed at the edges but still intact. Lucky's ears perked up and he sniffed the air again, his body trembling with cautious excitement. The woman knelt down and placed the leash on the ground, her hands shaking. "We thought he was gone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he never stopped waiting, did he?" The man stepped closer, but before he could reach Lucky, the dog took a step back, his gaze darting once again toward the road. The tension in the air grew thicker as another sound reached their ears. Another car engine, this one approaching from the opposite direction. Lucky's tail wagged again, faster this time, and he turned completely, his body facing the new vehicle. The man and the woman froze, their faces pale as they exchanged a look of uncertainty. The villagers, now visibly uneasy, watched in silence as the second car pulled up. This one was older, its paint chipped, and it came to a sudden stop just a few feet away. The door swung open, and a third figure emerged. This time, it was someone no one recognized, an older woman with silver hair and a worn expression. She held a bag in one hand, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Lucky. "Is this him?" she asked, her voice calm but piercing. She looked at the man and the woman standing by Lucky's shelter. "Is this the dog you left behind?" Lucky barked again, his tail wagging furiously as he ran toward the older woman. She knelt down, opening her arms as Lucky threw himself into her embrace, his body quivering with emotion. The crowd gasped, and the man stepped back, his face pale. "Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with shock. "What are you doing here?" The older woman stayed on her knees, her arms wrapped tightly around Lucky as if she'd been waiting for this moment just as long as he had. Lucky whined softly, burying his face in her shoulder, his tail wagging so hard it seemed he might topple over. The villagers were stunned into silence, watching as years of longing and heartbreak seemed to dissolve in the warmth of that embrace. The man stepped forward hesitantly, his voice trembling. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She stood slowly, her hand still resting on Lucky's back. Her gaze was steady but filled with sadness as she looked at her son. "I came because someone had to," she said firmly. "I couldn't let him wait forever, not knowing if you'd ever come back." Her words cut through the air like a knife, and the man looked away, his guilt written all over his face. Lucky barked again, a short, sharp sound that drew everyone's attention. He pulled away from the older woman and looked between her and the man, his expression almost pleading. It was as if he wanted them to understand something words couldn't convey. The older woman sighed, her shoulders sagging. "You didn't tell them, did you?" she said, her voice softer now, tinged with disappointment. The man shook his head, his hands clenched into fists. "I thought it wouldn't matter," he admitted. I thought he'd move on." His voice broke, and he looked down at Lucky. "I didn't know he'd wait this long." Emma stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Tell us what?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "What haven't you said?" The older woman glanced at her son, then back at Lucky. Her voice wavered as she spoke. Lucky wasn't just a pet to him. He was a promise. She turned to face the crowd, her expression resolute. "Before my husband passed, he made my son promise to take care of Lucky, to never let him be alone. But when things got hard, he broke that promise." Her words hung in the air, and the man's face crumpled under their weight. Lucky barked again, louder this time, and ran back toward the road. The sound of the bark was so sharp, so insistent, that everyone turned to see what he was looking at. A faint figure emerged in the distance, walking slowly toward the gathering. As the figure came closer, the light from the car headlights illuminated a young boy, no older than 10, clutching a worn-out stuffed toy in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes wide as he looked at Lucky. The crowd parted instinctively, and Lucky ran to the boy, his tail wagging furiously. The boy dropped the stuffed toy, falling to his knees as Lucky reached him, the dog's body pressing against his as if they were the only two beings in the world. The older woman's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The man took a step back, his expression one of pure shock. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How can he be here?" The older woman turned to him, her expression soft but stern. "He never left," she said simply. "You thought you were the only one who failed Lucky. But he never stopped watching over him." The boy looked up, his small hand gripping Lucky's fur tightly. "I heard him," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "In my dreams. I kept hearing him bark, calling me. So I came." The villagers were silent, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they were witnessing. Lucky turned back to the man, his eyes shining with something that looked like forgiveness. The man fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he reached out to the dog. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." Lucky moved closer, resting his head against the man's chest for just a moment before stepping back to the boy. The older woman smiled faintly, her tears glistening in the dim light. "It's never too late to make things right," she said softly. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma stayed behind, watching the reunited family with a mixture of relief and awe. The stranger who had first noticed Lucky's unwavering loyalty approached her, their voice quiet. "Do you think he's finally at peace now?" Emma nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think Lucky always knew what he was waiting for," she said. "And now so do we." The scene faded into the quiet hum of the night, the sound of Lucky's joyful barks echoing through the air as he played with the boy, the promise of a new beginning shining brightly in the darkness. But as the last car left, the faint hum of another engine whispered through the distance, leaving the villagers wondering if Lucky's story was truly over, or if there was one final chapter left to tell. The night settled back into calm as the villagers began to drift away, each person quietly moved by what they had witnessed. The man, his mother, and the boy sat together near Lucky's old shelter, the dog nestled between them, content and at peace. For the first time in years, Lucky seemed to have everything he'd been waiting for, a family reunited and a sense of belonging restored. Emma stayed a few steps away, her thoughts swirling as she replayed everything that had unfolded. She watched the boy's laughter as he hugged Lucky tightly, the way the older woman's stern expression softened into pure love as she looked at the dog. Even the man, with all his guilt and regret, seemed lighter now, his shoulders no longer weighed down by the past. Lucky had brought them all back together, but it wasn't just about them. It was about something deeper, about how unwavering loyalty and love could heal wounds no one thought could be mended. The stranger who had been the first to notice Lucky approached Emma again. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," they said softly. "He waited all those years, and somehow it feels like he knew this moment was coming." Emma nodded, her voice quiet. "Animals have a way of understanding things we can't. Lucky never gave up, even when it seemed hopeless. I think he knew what he was waiting for, even when no one else did." The man stood up slowly, his eyes red but clear, and walked over to Emma. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice steady. "For looking after him when I couldn't. For giving him a chance to wait." Emma shook her head, a small smile on her lips. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. "Lucky did all the waiting. All I did was make sure he had a place to call home while he waited." The older woman stood as well, her hand resting gently on her son's shoulder. "It's never too late to fix what's broken," she said quietly, her eyes meeting Emma's. "Lucky proved that tonight. We just have to be willing to try." Her words carried a weight that lingered in the air, and Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude for having been part of Lucky's journey. As the boy played with Lucky nearby, his laughter filling the air, Emma turned to the man once more. "What will you do now?" she asked. He looked at Lucky, then at his son, and finally at his mother. "I think it's time to stop running," he said firmly. "Lucky waited for me all this time. The least I can do is be here for him now. For all of us." The words carried a finality that felt right, as if the circle was now complete. The boy called Lucky over, his small hands reaching out to hug the dog again. Lucky's tail wagged furiously, his eyes bright and happy. It was clear he had found his place again, surrounded by the people he had waited so patiently for. The older woman leaned down and kissed Lucky's head, whispering something only he could hear. The dog responded with a soft nuzzle, his gratitude shining through. The family began to gather their things, preparing to leave, but not before thanking Emma and the villagers who had cared for Lucky all these years. It was a quiet but heartfelt goodbye, one that carried a sense of closure. As Emma watched them walk away, Lucky glancing back one last time before trotting happily alongside the boy, she felt a mix of emotions, relief, joy, and a bittersweet sense of farewell. She knew she'd miss him, but she also knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. His story wasn't just about waiting. It was about the love and hope that can endure even the longest of separations. The night grew still again, and the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. Emma turned toward her small shelter, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Lucky's journey had come full circle, and in doing so, it had reminded everyone of the power of loyalty and love. It wasn't just a dog's story. It was a story of resilience, of promises kept, and of the enduring connections that bring people together. With a deep breath, Emma turned off the porch light and stepped inside, leaving the night to its peace. Somewhere in the distance, Lucky's joyful bark echoed one last time, carrying with it the promise of a new beginning.